The hospital called at 6:47 inches the morning. I remember the exact time because I had just set my coffee down and the mug left a ring on the paper I was grading. I was behind on everything that week. I almost didn't answer. The woman on the phone said she was a discharge coordinator at St. Anthony's Medical Center. She said my grandfather, Walter, 82 years old, recovering from a hip replacement he'd had 4 days earlier, had been discharged 30 minutes ago. She was calling to follow up and confirm that someone had picked him up safely. I said I didn't know he had been discharged. There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, "His emergency contact, a Margaret Holloway, signed the release paperwork this morning and indicated she would be transporting him home." Margaret Holloway is my aunt, my father's older sister. She had been listed as his emergency contact for the past 3 years, ever since she moved back to Cincinnati, and told everyone at every family dinner that she was the one keeping an eye on Grandpa. She said it the way people say things when they want credit without doing the work. I asked the coordinator what time Margaret had left with him. She said, "That's the thing. Miss Holloway signed the paperwork and left. But your grandfather, he's still here. He's been sitting in the discharge waiting area for 40 minutes. He told a nurse he was waiting for his ride. We called the number on file and it went to voicemail. I was in my car before she finished the sentence. It takes 22 minutes to get from my apartment to St. Anthony's on a normal morning. I made it in 14. I know because I kept watching the clock the entire drive, thinking about a man who had just had his hip replaced 4 days ago sitting in a plastic chair by the front entrance of a hospital, in January, in Ohio, waiting for a ride that was never coming. I found him exactly where they said he would be. He was in a wheelchair they had lent him, positioned near the automatic doors, which kept sliding open every time someone walked in or out. Each time they opened, a gust of cold air rolled through. He had his coat buttoned to the top and his hands folded in his lap, and he was looking at the parking lot the way you look at something when you've stopped expecting it to change. When he saw me walk through the doors, his face did something I'm not going to be able to describe properly. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like he'd been holding himself very still for a long time, and something in him finally loosened. He said, "There she is. That's it." That's all he said. And I had to look away for a second and pretend I was digging through my bag because I was not going to cry in the hospital lobby. Not yet. I got him loaded into my car. A nurse helped me fold the wheelchair and get it in the trunk. On the drive home to my apartment, because I didn't even discuss another option, he told me that Margaret had come in that morning, talked to some doctors, signed some papers, and told him she'd pull the car around front and be right back. He had waited. He kept waiting. After 20 minutes, he asked a passing nurse if something might be wrong. That's when they figured out she had already left the building. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was recounting a minor inconvenience, like he was trying to make it easier for me. I kept my voice even the whole drive. I asked him if he was in pain. He said his hip ached, but it wasn't bad. I asked if he'd eaten. He said they'd given him breakfast before the discharge. I turned on the heat in the car and kept driving, and did not say a single word about my aunt until I had him settled on my couch with a pillow under his leg and a cup of tea on the table next to him and the television on. Then I went into my bedroom and I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Before I could say anything, she said, "Oh good, you went and got him? I was going to call you, but I figured you were already on your way." I asked her what had happened. She said something came up. She said it in the tone people use when they don't want to be questioned. She said Walter understood, that he was fine, that he was a grown man, and the hospital had staff. She said she'd been running herself ragged for 3 years, and she needed people to understand that she couldn't do everything. I asked her where she was right now. She said she was at home. I asked her what had come up that was more urgent than picking up her 82-year-old father from the hospital after major surgery. The pause this time was different, shorter. Then she said, "You know, I don't appreciate your tone. I've been handling Grandpa's affairs for 3 years, while you were busy with your little classroom. Don't call me to lecture me." She hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed for about 2 minutes. Then I went back out to the living room and checked on my grandfather, who had fallen asleep with the television on. I took the tea off the table so it wouldn't get cold, and I covered him with a blanket, and I stood there looking at him for a moment. This man who had taught me to fish and to play chess, and who had shown up to every single one of my school plays, even the bad ones. And I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Margaret had been doing with 3 years of handling his affairs. I want to be careful here because I'm not someone who goes looking for problems. I teach 8-year-olds. My life is organized around snack schedules and reading assessments and trying to remember which kid has a peanut allergy. I am not naturally confrontational, but I had been watching something feel slightly wrong for a long time, and I had told myself I was imagining it. The way my grandfather would ask me, carefully, whether I knew anything about his savings account, the way Margaret would redirect conversations about money, the way his house, which he'd kept spotless for 60 years, had started to look shabby, a leaky faucet not fixed, gutters hanging loose. Little things. I didn't go looking to start a fight. I went looking for information. The first thing I did was call my grandfather's bank. I couldn't get account details. I wasn't on his account, but I asked him that evening, gently, if he had any recent statements. He said Margaret handled all of that. He said she had set up some kind of automatic system, and she just took care of it and told him what he needed to know. He said he trusted her because she was his daughter and she knew about finances and he didn't want to make things difficult. The way he said that last part, I didn't want to make things difficult, told me everything about what kind of conversations had been had with him. I asked if he still had any mail from the bank. He said Margaret usually picked up his mail when she visited. I asked him when she had last visited his house. He thought about it and said he wasn't entirely sure. He thought maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe longer. His house was 40 minutes from mine. I had been told, consistently, by Margaret, at every family gathering for 3 years, that she was on top of everything, that she stopped by regularly, that I didn't need to worry, that I should focus on my career. I had believed her because I wanted to believe her, because believing her was easier. I drove to his house that weekend. He came with me. The gutters were not just loose, one had come completely detached on the side facing the backyard. There was a water stain on the kitchen ceiling that hadn't been there at Christmas. The refrigerator had food in it that had expired in November. He walked through his own house, looking at things quietly, and I could see him doing the math the same way I was doing it. We sat down at his kitchen table, and I asked him directly, did he know how much was in his savings account? He said he used to know. He said there had been money set aside from when he sold some property up in Claremont County, from years of careful saving, and that he had meant for it to last him through the end of his life and then be divided between his children. He said it was a substantial amount. When I asked him to be more specific, he said, at last count, approximately $200,000. I asked him when last count was. He said Margaret had shown him a statement about 8 months ago and the number had been right around there. I asked him if he had seen any statement since then. He said he had asked once. Margaret had told him the account had been reorganized for tax purposes, and she'd show him the updated paperwork when things settled. He said he hadn't wanted to push. I asked him if I could take him to the bank on Monday. He said yes. We went Monday morning. I took a personal day. We sat across from a branch manager named Diane, who had one of those faces that's very composed but shows everything anyway. She pulled up my grandfather's account. He was there in person with his ID. So she could do this, and she looked at the screen for a moment, and then she looked at him and said, in the most careful voice possible, that she wanted to make sure she was looking at the right account. She was looking at the right account. The balance was $4,200. In 14 months since Margaret had been added to the account as a co-signer, which my grandfather did not fully remember authorizing, and which Diane showed us had been done with a notarized form signed at a branch 40 minutes away from his house, approximately $196,000 had been withdrawn or transferred. In increments, carefully, never more than $9,500 at a time, Diane noted, which my grandfather didn't know the significance of, but I did. Anything over $10,000 triggers automatic federal reporting requirements. My grandfather sat very still in that chair. Diane asked him if he had authorized these withdrawals. He said no. She asked if he had any knowledge of where the funds had gone. He said no. She pulled a box of tissues from her desk drawer and set it on the corner of the desk near him, without saying anything about it. I thought that was one of the kindest things I had ever seen a stranger do. I asked Diane what the next steps were. She said she was required to flag this and that she strongly recommended we contact law enforcement. She said the bank had a fraud department and she would initiate their process. She also recommended we contact Adult Protective Services because this appeared to be a case of financial elder abuse, which is a crime under Ohio law. She wrote down 2 phone numbers on a sticky note and pushed it across the desk. I called both of them from the parking lot. Right there, sitting in my car with my grandfather in the passenger seat. I did not wait. I did not think about what this meant for family relationships or holiday dinners or what my father would say. I looked at my grandfather's face. He had not cried in the bank. He had held himself completely still the entire time, and I called Adult Protective Services, and then I called the non-emergency police line, and I reported what we had found. I kept every note I took that day. I have a habit, from teaching, of writing things down. Times, names, what was said. I have the sticky note from Diane. I have the case numbers from both calls I made. I had already, before any of this, started keeping a log, dates Margaret did or didn't show up, things my grandfather mentioned, the condition of his house. I hadn't even known why I was doing it. I just felt like I should. The detective, who was assigned to the case, his name was Ramirez, and he was polite and thorough, and did not make my grandfather feel stupid for trusting his own daughter. Told me later that the documentation I had was more organized than what most people bring in. He said, most families come in with a feeling. They come in with something wrong in their gut, but nothing on paper. He said, paper matters. While all of this was in motion, I had my grandfather move in with me. My apartment is not big. It's a 2-bedroom, and the second bedroom had been my grading room, which is a polite name for the room where I put things I didn't know where else to put. I cleared it out over a weekend. I borrowed a bed frame from my friend Carla. My grandfather brought 3 boxes and his chess set, and a photograph of my grandmother that he put on the nightstand the first night. He slept 12 hours that first night. I checked on him twice. Both times he was completely out, breathing slow and even. Which I think was the first time in a long time he had slept somewhere he felt safe. Margaret called twice the first week. I did not answer. I texted her that my grandfather was staying with me while he finished recovering, and that I had nothing else to say to her at the moment. She called my father, who lives in Phoenix and who I had already spoken to, who was shocked, and then furious, and then guilty in the way people get when they realize they should have been paying more attention. She called 2 cousins. She told them I had blown a misunderstanding completely out of proportion, and that she had documentation for every financial decision, and that she had only been trying to help a man who couldn't manage his own affairs. That last part was what made me the most angry. My grandfather is sharper than most people half his age. He does the crossword in pen. He remembers the names of my students when I mention them. He had been made to feel incapable by someone who needed him to feel incapable, because incapable people don't ask questions about their bank accounts. The investigation took 4 months. I want to be honest about those 4 months because it wasn't a movie. There were weeks where nothing seemed to be happening. There were phone calls to Detective Ramirez where he told me to be patient, and I had to remind myself not to push. There were 2 conversations with a victim's advocate who helped my grandfather understand what his options were and what the process looked like. There was a meeting with an elder law attorney who filed for an emergency guardianship review, which temporarily restricted Margaret's access to any remaining accounts or assets while the investigation was active. There was a Sunday dinner at my father's brother's house, my Uncle Dennis, who is Margaret's brother, who is largely harmless, but who has a deep instinct for avoiding conflict, where Margaret showed up and sat across the table from my grandfather and said, in front of everyone, that she was being persecuted by her own family, and that she had given 3 years of her life for him and gotten nothing but accusations. My grandfather put down his fork and looked at her for a long moment. The table was quiet. He said, "Margaret, I trusted you." That was it. He picked his fork back up. Margaret left before dessert. 3 of the other people at that table, who had previously been reserving judgment, called me within 48 hours to say they were sorry they hadn't listened sooner. In February of this year, Margaret was formally charged with financial exploitation of an elderly adult, which, in Ohio, is a felony when the amount exceeds $1,000. The total documented amount was $194,400. Her husband, who I had always thought was just a quiet man who let Margaret run things, had received several of the wire transfers into a joint account they held. He was charged as well. There was a secondary finding that she had also been collecting his pension checks. He had a small pension from 30 years working at a manufacturing plant by having the mailing address changed to a P.O. box she controlled. He had not known for 2 years that he was even still receiving a pension. That money was gone too. It was documented, added to the charges, and added to the restitution order. The restitution order. I want to talk about that because it was the thing I had least expected and the thing that mattered most practically. The court ordered full restitution, the entire $194,400, plus the pension funds, plus interest. Margaret and her husband have to pay it back. They are currently on a structured repayment plan overseen by the court. They will be paying it for years. They sold the boat they kept at a marina on the Kentucky side of the river. They listed their vacation property. I did not feel satisfaction about that the way I thought I would. I mostly just felt tired, and glad, and like something that had been held at a wrong angle for a very long time had finally been set down correctly. Margaret received 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory financial counseling, and 200 hours of community service. Her husband received 18 months probation. There had been a possibility of prison time. The prosecutor had pushed for it, but the judge noted both their ages, the restitution agreement, and no prior criminal record. I will tell you honestly that I had wanted more. I think my grandfather did too, though he never said so. But I have also learned in the past year that justice and satisfaction are not always the same shape, and the system gave us what it could. And what it gave us was real. My grandfather has his money back. Not all of it, not yet. It comes in payments, but it's coming. He has a financial guardian now, someone appointed by the court specifically to oversee his accounts, independent of any family member. He understands every statement. He reviews them with the guardian every month, and he calls me afterward to tell me what he read. And there's something in his voice when he does that something that sounds like a man who is not being kept in the dark anymore. He's still living with me. We talked, after everything settled, about whether he wanted to go back to his house, or move somewhere with more support, or continue as we were. He said he'd stay with me if I'd have him. I said obviously. We have a routine now. In the mornings I make coffee and he makes toast, which he insists on doing himself because he says I burn it. We do the crossword together on weekends, though I mostly just watch because he doesn't need the help. He comes to school twice a year on my students' grandparent days, and he is, without question, the most popular grandfather in the room. He brings butterscotch candies and he remembers every kid's name by the end of the day. Last Thursday, a student named Maya, she's the small one in the second row, big eyes, very serious, came up to me at the end of the day while we were putting on coats, and she said, "Miss, is that man your grandpa?" I said yes. She said, "He's nice. You're lucky." I thought about the hospital lobby in January, the automatic doors letting in the cold, a man in a wheelchair looking at a parking lot. I thought about a sticky note with 2 phone numbers on it. I thought about a document folder I started keeping because something felt wrong and I didn't know why. I said yes, I'm lucky. And I meant it. I meant it completely. But what I also know, and what I want anyone watching this to hear, is that luck had nothing to do with it. I showed up, I wrote things down. I made the calls the same day, in the parking lot, before I had time to talk myself out of it. I chose to believe what I was seeing, instead of what was easier to believe. Your instincts are telling you something. Write it down. Make the call. Don't wait until you've seen enough. You've already seen enough. He still has his chess set on the nightstand. He still wins every time we play. I don't even mind anymore.